few, and we're going to finish the book, kinda. So I called this class Coincidence or Providence. We didn't really talk about it that much in the introductory material, but this is a major theme in this book. And the reason is that, well, let me back up and make a different statement. I think it's important when we read the Bible to listen to the conversation that the divine is having with humanity. Too often we look at the book and we look at the text and we let the text define how we read it. And so, for instance, in the book of Esther, if we decide that the book of Esther is a history book, then we read it like it's a history book, as opposed to listening to the conversation. A better question, maybe, as opposed to what kind of book is this, is asking the question, what is God? Why did God inspire this? Why did God want me to see this conversation, to see this text? What is it about him? What it is about humanity that I need to understand? So, in Esther's world, we talked about this, what were the Jews at the time thinking? What was the big question for the community, the Jewish community, during the time that Esther was alive? It's one major question.
Are we still the chosen ones?
Are we still the chosen ones? For hundreds of years, the Jewish people had been taken into captivity. They had been made to be slaves. They had been conquered people. And their temple has now been destroyed. And they're coming into their third empire. They were assimilated into the Assyrian Empire, then into the Babylonian Empire, and now here they are in Persia. Are we still the chosen people? And Haman sends a clue about what he believes the fate of these so-called chosen people are. And it's communicated through the way that he determines their fate, right? He's throwing dice every day to decide when they're going to get exterminated. It's genocide, planned genocide based on a roll of dice, what day it's going to happen, right? And so one of the major themes is life about coincidence or is life about providence? And what is God saying about that? And there are so many things in this story. What happened here? That suggest maybe coincidence is really controlling it all. For instance, is it a coincidence that Xerxes failed to reward Haman? Was it a coincidence that that night, several years later, he couldn't sleep? Was it a coincidence that when he asked his servant to bring him the Chronicles of Persia and read to him, that the story read was the story about Mordecai saving him? Was it a coincidence that Haman couldn't control himself and came to the king's night chamber right during the middle of the king's excitement about honoring someone? Were those coincidences or were they providential? So today, we are going to try and get the slideshow to work. And we're going to talk about today's questions from that group of questions that we put together. We're going to review the timelines of chapters 4 through 9. I think that's extremely important. Sometimes I forget that. We're going to talk about the engineered illusion. We're going to talk about how no plunder was taken. We're going to talk about Mordecai's mystery reference, which you didn't see that one coming at all. And then we're going to talk about the name Purim for this holiday. And if we have time, I'll introduce Mordecai's popularity and how that relates to next week's class. So here's our list of questions. I've crossed off the ones that we've already gone through. Today, I would like to talk about why the holiday is called Purim, why Mordecai minimized Esther's role, why Mordecai talked about the destruction of Esther and her father's house, and why the Jews didn't take plunder after they were dead. And hopefully we'll get through all of that. But let's start by looking at the timeline of chapters 4 through 9. Am I going in the right order? There it is. Okay. So I assigned some arbitrary dates. Sorry. I put asterisks by the ones that we actually have some evidence for in the text. And of course, we don't use the lunar calendar, so I decided to just use the Gregorian calendar. So does anybody remember what date Haman's original edict was written on? It was the 13th of the first month. That's what it says. So so what happens right after that? Mordecai hears about it. He is very upset. He puts on sackcloth. He goes mourning throughout the city. Can't come to work. He takes some time off. I gave him about 10 days. So on the 23rd, we see that picture there in the top left of January. A couple of days later, he's communicating with Esther. Towards the end of the month, after another 3 days of fasting, and Esther thinking about all this, she goes to the king. By early February, she's having these feasts with Haman and the king. She has a couple of them, one on the 2nd, then another one on the 3rd. And by the 4th, Haman's gone, right? She's exposed him for what he is. Probably takes a couple of weeks to transfer the estate, right? I mean, Haman's estate gets given to Esther, and Esther gives it to Mordecai. So I put a couple of 3 weeks in there for that. But as we said, I think last week, the story can't end because we still haven't reversed the edict. And so Esther has to go again, and that's where she cries in front of the king and says, I can't stand it. My people are going to die. She reveals that she is the surrogate daughter / cousin to Mordecai. Mordecai, a few days later, gets lifted up in his position. He gets the ring. We're now into chapter 8. Chapter 4 was the one up there in January 23rd. And then it says on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, Mordecai writes the 2nd edict that goes out into the empire. And so that's March 23rd. And then, and this is a pretty important point, and this is where I usually forget, is that Mordecai writes his edict on the 23rd day of the 3rd month. But the day to destroy the Jews, the days of extermination, are scheduled for December 13th, the 13th day of the 12th month. That is when the lot was cast for Purim. And then, we have this, if you've finished the text and you read through chapter 9, you'll see that the 10 sons of Haman were impaled on the 14th of December after the first day of fighting. So let's talk about what I entitled the engineered illusion. So we talked about this last week. Why did Mordecai write his edict in such a way that it mirrored Haman's edict? He said, the Jews are allowed to kill their enemies, men, women, and children, and take and plunder their spoil, right? Why did we say Mordecai wrote that? And this is an important point to understand that most people miss, right? Because within the Christian context throughout history, people have said, this should not be in the Bible. And it shouldn't be in the Bible because look at the way these Jews behave. They just want to kill everybody. Women, children, they're ruthless. Why did Mordecai write that edict that way? Brad, you told us last week. Tell us again.
Because the governors of the different regions, if you did not word it as strong as the original, then they would potentially take sides to which one to allow to happen or persuade to happen in their region.
Right. So you've got no internet, you've got no telephones, you've got no telegraphs. You got no way of really communicating in a timely way. You're on horseback. You got the Pony Express. That's about it. And you get this edict sometime in January that says on the 13th of December, anybody who has a problem with the Jews, they can rise up against them and kill them, kill their men, their women, their children, and take anything that they own as their own. And then 3 months later, you get this new edict that says the Jews can defend themselves and they can kill the men, women, and children who attack them, and they can take all their possessions, whatever they want, as their own. So if you are one of the governors of one of these provinces and you're hoping to earn the favor of the king and be on the right side of history, as they say, you got to figure it out. And you're going to be looking for the nuances. And maybe, just maybe, this was an engineered illusion to try and get the governors of the provinces to not pick a side, to think that actually the king had changed his mind and was really on the Jews' side. But that may not be true either. So, pretend that you don't have a Bible. Pretend that you don't know the specifics. Pretend that you know the story. If I read this to you, then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews, there was light and gladness and joy and honor. When would you say that happened in the chronology of the story? At the end. Can you define end a little bit more for us? Because it is sort of, at the end of the book, but like the last sentence, right? Like this is a parade, it seems like, don't you think? Like, when do you have a parade? You have a parade when you have victory, right? Does anybody know when this really happened? It happened right after Mordecai wrote his edict. It happened in March, and the battle hadn't even started. The battle doesn't happen until December. Kind of weird. When you see these kinds of things, dig a little deeper, ask a few questions. They're celebrating victory 8 to 9 months before the contest has even started. That's what's happening. If you're doing that, what does it suggest about you? What's that?
It's jinxing yourself.
You're jinxing yourself. Right. I mean, if you are just celebrating the victory before the contest has ever begun, what does it communicate? Arrogance. And if we can put that in use another word that has a little bit more positive spin, confidence. I am so confident that I am going to be victorious, then I'm just going to celebrate now, right? Or maybe the king is on my side. There's no way I could lose, right? Is this because they have that confidence, or is this an engineered illusion that's going on?
I think it's maybe because is this after both edicts came out?
Yes.
So do you think maybe because they feel like, okay, now we have equal ground, we have a chance?
Oh, I absolutely believe that. But I think that I think that Esther and Mordecai are doing something here, right? I think there is, you can't manufacture light, gladness, joy, and honor in all the people, right? Unless like you're in some Potemkin state and you're paying people to come and be part of the crowd. That's not what's happening. So there is genuine happiness that this isn't happening. But I think that it's brilliant on Mordecai and Esther's part.
It could be their question was, are we still the chosen one? The first edict was saying you're being wiped out, so now we're not the chosen one. And this new edict is saying, hey, we have a fighting chance.
Yes, the hope is
Be
being
the chosen one.
right. Hope is still being restored. Okay, so if you've read the story, we're going to fast forward now into chapter 9, and the 13th of December arrives, and the uprising of the Civil War, whatever you want to call it, starts. A report is brought to the king for about the city of Susa, and 500 people have been killed in the city of Susa. 510, actually. Does anybody know who the last 10 were? Do you remember the story? Haman's sons. Haman had 10 sons, and they all got killed on the 13th of December during that uprising. And the king is, let's just say he doesn't say to Esther, what is your petition? Up to half the kingdom, I will grant it to you. He said, 500 people, 500 good Persians have died in Susa alone. Who's to say what's gone on in the rest of the kingdom? But then she doesn't come. He says, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be done. He asks. We don't get any of this scepter approach, nearly get your head chopped off. It does appear as though Esther has risen to a status where it's no longer about being called in front of the king. She's found her voice, and he's listening. 500 people have died in our city alone. Is there anything else that you want? What does she ask for? Chapter 9, first half. Two things she asked for. Another day, and what else? This is another reason why Christians don't like this book. Can we impale the 10 sons of Haman? Now, I don't know if you picked up on this, but these guys were dead before they impaled them. Okay, so I forgot to give the warning that today's presentation is rated mature audiences only because of graphic scenes of death and flashing strobe lights, but so it's a little morbid what she's asking for. But in her day and age, why would she ask for that? Why would she want 10 dead bodies impaled on a pole so that everybody can see it?
Maybe as a public demonstration of Haman's been completely overcome, even his next generation conquered.
Yep. What else? What are the Jews up against? What's the whole thing been going on in the whole empire? What are people trying to figure out? You've got two opposing edicts that read exactly the same. What are people trying to figure out?
Which one? Which is the little better?
Which is where is the king land in all of this? And Susa? Well, that's where the king's palace is, right? This is where the king is right now. It's the winter palace, and it's December. So this is where the king is. And in this city, this sends a signal to everybody. And oh, by the way, in this city, the Jews can fight for another day. They can fight back. We don't know what would have happened if the Jews were required to put their weapons down at the end of this day, whether or not the people in Susa would have tried to figure out without an edict. Maybe this is more of an engineered illusion, because I don't think the king is actually on either side. I mean, what did we say the king wanted when he had that beauty contest?
Admiration.
No, that is not what we said. We said he wanted Miss Persia, right? We said he wanted somebody to represent the entire
But
empire.
admiration, for the sake of.
He wanted everyone to admire. I can work that in. Everyone to admire his empire, right? And to not have secondary or maybe primary loyalties. We even talked about the idea that maybe Vashti was an Egyptian or a Babylonian, and maybe that's why she didn't want to come before the king when he called, because he just put down rebellions in Babylon and in Egypt. So now let's turn to this idea of no plunder taken. The edict from Mordecai wrote that the Jews could kill everybody and take their possessions in Esther chapter 8, verse 11. But here in chapter 9, 3 times, and when you see this kind of thing repeated, and I don't know if you noticed, but it's exactly the same language. When it's repeated like that, it's emphasizing, right? The text is emphasizing they did not lay their hands on the plunder in verse 10. They did not lay their hands on the plunder in verse 15. They did not lay their hands on the plunder in verse 16. All throughout the empire. Why not? Why didn't they take it? How would you feel if somebody was after your family, trying to kill them? You went to battle and you won. They're dead. All of them. They're gone.
They didn't want their plunder.
I would. I don't know. Sorry, I just would. I mean, these are people. The Jews are a conquered people. These are people who are struggling throughout the empire. I'm not saying all of them are struggling, but just like any society, you've got different strata, socioeconomic strata. Why would you take it?
It would depend on backstory, because like they were told other times, don't take plunder. They took plunder, hid it in their tents, and then all of a sudden God's not letting them win battles. Maybe they were.
There's an edict here. There is an edict here coming from a Benjamite who is second in command, who has the king's signet ring, and he has said, kill them all, men, women, and children, and take their plunder as your spoil. Why not? There's something else that's been emphasized like this, weirdly enough, throughout this story, and it's the title that comes after Haman's name. Over and over and over, anytime you read about Haman, what do you read about? Who was Haman? He was an Agite. Who was Agag? Anybody know?
King that Saul spared.
Agag was the king of the Amalekites. Did somebody say that? And if you want, so in Samuel 15, 1 Samuel 15, who were the Amalekites? not the story with Saul. Where'd they show up in the scene before that?
I think they opposed them while they were.
Say it again?
They opposed them like while they were traveling.
That's right. The Exodus happens, and the Amalekites try to attack the Jews when they're in the Exodus. And this was not a good thing. This was not a good idea. And when they finally came into the Promised Land, God said, I want you to go, and I'm going to punish them for having opposed you when you were in the Exodus. And I want you to kill them. And I want you to wipe them out. I want you to wipe them off the face of the earth. Men, women, children, goats, dogs, cats, fish, pets, livestock, all of it. And Saul didn't do it. He let Agag live. And in 1 Samuel 15, verse 2, it says, thus the Lord of hosts says, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he set himself against him on his way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and utterly destroy all that he, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, has. Do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. So, interestingly enough, all the Jews in exile in Persia, 400 years later, they knew that story. And when they took out these people who were fighting against them in the name of Haman, the descendant of Agag, they said, no plunder. We're not taking any of it. So that is a reference back to what God was doing. Now let's cross off question.
Brad was right.
What?
Right? Like
Oh yeah, Brad was right. I knew he knew.
yeah.
Yeah. So crossed off question 10. Now, before we go to question 2, why is the holiday called Purim? We have to turn to these other 2 questions in blue. Why did Mordecai minimize Esther's role? Why does Mordecai talk about the destruction of Esther and her father's house? We have to get those 2 first, and it's going to be a bit of a what do you call that? I'm going to take a little.
Detour.
Thanks. Take a little detour. So, do you remember in chapter 4, Mordecai and Esther don't get to see each other every day the way they did before. She's now the queen, and he is still working in the palace, but he doesn't get to see her every day the way he did when she was part of the beauty pageant. And in this chapter, she learns from one of her servants that one of her eunuchs that Mordecai is upset, that he's been mourning, that he's put himself in sackcloth, that he's not coming to work, and they start communicating. And one of the things that we talked about when we were covering chapter 4 is that we were drawn into the story in ways that had never happened before in chapter 4. Do you remember the technique that the author uses to draw us into the story? This gets into the literary style. Up to this point, the first 3 chapters, everything is told from the narrative's perspective. It's all hands off. In chapter 4, and that's very unusual with the Bible. In chapter 4, we start getting quotes. So all of a sudden we're hearing the thoughts in chapter 4 of the characters. We're not hearing interpretations of the thoughts. We're not just giving the narrative of what happened. We're actually given the words that they said to each other. And we also talked about this. Mordecai told this person to reply to Esther, and we have the quote here, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent in all this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jew from another place, You and your father's house will perish. Who knows whether you will have attained, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this? Okay, so this is where it all, this is the only passage that anybody remembers out of the book of Esther, but let's talk about how weird this passage is. So if you're Mordecai and you just found out that an edict has been written to conduct genocide against all of your kinsmen, and it's going to happen in 12 months, and you're really upset, and your daughter, the gal that you have brought up as your daughter, is queen, and you ask her to go to the king, and she says, I might get my head cut off. Would you say to her, look, if you don't do this, God will save us another way. You're really not that important. Would that be your posture? Isn't that what he's saying here? What else is strange? What else is strange about what he says to her? We talked about how strange this particular response was of Mordecai.
Well, isn't it like him talking about her family, which doesn't exist?
Right. She's an orphan. What is with the father's house, right? Isn't she? You and your father's house will perish. So this is a weirdness in this story, okay? And I think that in order to understand this, first of all, this is really hard. Do not try this at home. This conversation, first of all, let me say that the insights that I'm about ready to share are not mine. They come from Rabbi David Foreman. And I have to accept Foreman's interpretation and his analysis of the Hebrew, but I have done everything that I know how to do to fact check all the stuff that's in Hebrew, and it all checks out. But this particular conversation has an uncanny parallel with an obscure text in the Torah. And that mystery passage is tucked away in the book of Numbers. So we have to start by looking at this Hebrew word, na'ara. Now, na'ara in Esther chapter 2 is the word that's used to describe Esther. And it is a word that means a young woman who is on the cusp of adulthood. So what else did I write about that? So there are these similarities between Mordecai's conversation with Esther and this passage in Numbers. So let's have a look at some of those similarities. In this passage in Numbers, they both talk about a na'ara who marries. They both discuss guidance, both Mordecai's conversation with Esther and also this passage in Number talk about guidance in their relationship with their spouse. They also both talk about the na'ara in her father's household. They also both include the disaster that will occur if one keeps silent. And they also both include an urgency and a need to act in a short window of time. Now, you might think, oh, that's a coincidence, because we don't really think this way. But Jews at the time who understood the Torah, they understood these kinds of connections. But before you decide whether or not this is coincidence or providence, let's look at the idea of silence. So it is not uncommon in the Old Testament, in Hebrew writings, to repeat a verb twice to emphasize it. It's not uncommon at all. And actually, the text in 4:14 of Esther literally reads, I'm sorry, it must be, 4:14. It literally reads, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. So there are two words for the word silent in Hebrew, and I don't know how to pronounce either one of them, but I'll take a crack at it. Lishtak and leacherish. Lishtak is talking about an inanimate object. In the book of Jonah, Jonah said to the sailors, if you throw me over, the sea will become silent. That's the way it really reads. Anytime lishtak is used, it is an inanimate object that becomes still, that becomes quiet. Leacherish is from the root word, the noun that refers to a deaf person. So it's like sticking your fingers in your ear. If you remain silent and this word is being used, it's talking about a person who is choosing not to hear or choosing not to listen or remaining silent after they know. And the word leacherish is being used in the book of Esther. And there's one other place in the Old Testament where that word is used twice in a row.
Numbers.
That's exactly right. It's this very same passage. So I'm sure all of you have read it. It's in Numbers chapter 30. And it is well, before I go there, it's talking about vows. And it's talking about a Na'ara who makes a vow that is kind of stupid. It refers to it as making a rash vow, the whole chapter. You'd have to read the whole chapter. It talks about men making vows. It talks about young women making vows before they're married. It talks about women making vows after they're married, and it talks about how if a husband hears about a vow that his wife has made that will be detrimental to her, and he does not say something, the same day he hears about it, then if it has negative consequences, that's on him. He is going to be held responsible. And if a father hears about his daughter, the Na'ara, who makes a rash vow, and he hears about it and doesn't say something the first day he hears about it, then the sin is on him and his household. But if he says something as soon as he hears about it, he can annul that vow. And I think at the end of that chapter, it reads, her husband may confirm it, her husband may annul it. Isha yakamena, vaisha yapur rena. Yeah, there goes my Hebrew. Now, here's another one. I think these might be out of order. That's really too bad. I put these slides in the wrong order. So this word Isha is what's called what did I put there? A heteronym. I'd never heard that word before. That's why I had to look at it. We have heteronyms in English. They're words that if you change the vowelization, they have two different meanings. And I've put some examples up here. Like, don't desert me in the desert. I object to that object being used. Record my record. Right? It turns out that Isha, if you change the vowelization, it means something different. In the context of Numbers chapter 30, it means her husband. Her husband can confirm it. Her husband can annul it. What do you suppose if you didn't read the last slide, what do you suppose the other meaning is if you change the vowelization of Isha? Can you guess? It means a woman. So if you vowelize that particular sentence differently from the way it is in Numbers chapter 30, instead of that verse reading, a husband can confirm it, a husband can annul it, it would read, a woman can confirm it, a woman can annul it. I think that's interesting. I think you can see the parallels. Do I need to say anything else?
That's the things. I mean, I kind of see them, but I don't see like.
So who made the vow? Not in Numbers chapter 30, in Esther. Who made the vow? Who made the edict?
Oh,
Whose seal was rash?
Haman, the king.
Haman in the name of the king. So it really is coming from the king. And who is the king relative to the Na'ara? It's the spouse of the Na'ara. And what is the command in Numbers chapter 30? When you hear of it, if you remain silent, that sin is on you and your household. Right? But if you speak up, you can annul it, but you must do it right now. And isn't that exactly what Haman said to Esther? Thank you. I always mix those two guys up. Mordecai said to Esther, you must go now and say this to the king. A woman can confirm it. A woman can annul it. We don't have time to talk about the fact that implicit in this chapter 30 of Numbers is that there is choosing to say nothing is in fact making a decision. It's not a maybe. Silence is not a maybe in that condition. What God says is silence is affirmation. It is participation. It is you have to bear a responsibility. And isn't that what Mordecai said to Esther? And he said, and if you do bear responsibility, according to Numbers 30, you and your father's household will be punished. And isn't that what Mordecai said to Esther?
Well, she already, you know, but it's like.
Wasn't me. I didn't do it. Okay. So I'll have to remember to change those slides, put them back in order. So now we can go and we can answer the question about the name of Purim, right? We can turn our attention back to that in the last 5 minutes here. And I sort of gave this away in one of the previous slides. So now we've gotten to why Mordecai minimized Esther's role, why Mordecai talked about the destruction of Esther and her father's household, looking at the day. Hey, what is going on? Okay, so the text actually tells us why this holiday is called Purim, and we talked about how weird that was. Why is this weird? Remember, I used the analogy of like the Kalashnikov. Did I? Yeah, the AK-47, right? So if you have, if you knew that on a particular day, everyone in the university neighborhood was allowed to wipe out this congregation with an AK-47. And you survived, and we as a congregation survived that. Why would we call the holiday when we survived that AK-47 Day? Wouldn't that be a great name for holiday? So why are we, we determined which day the Jews were going to be wiped out. Haman determined that based on chance, based on a roll of the dice, based on a roll of the poor, the lots that were cast. Why are we calling it Purim? Seems like a weird thing to do. Well, it tells us why they called it Purim. Because, well, Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agite, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them and had cast Pur, that is the lot, to disturb them and to destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, that's my emphasis through Esther, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should be returned on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they call these days Purim after the name Pur, and because of the instruction in this letter, both what they had seen and in regard to what had happened to them. So it appears that there's two reasons why they call it Purim. Doesn't it appear that way to you? One is certainly the lots, Pur, right? And because of the instructions written in this letter, both what they'd seen and in regard to what had happened to them. What's that about? I don't think it's the letter of Esther. I don't think it's that letter, just for the record. It's the counter edict that they're talking about. Somehow, it's the counter edict, right? What did the counter edict do for the Jews? What's that? It gave them a fighting chance. But if we link this back to Numbers chapter 30, he can confirm it, he can annul it. A woman can confirm it, a woman can annul it. What did that second edict do? It annulled it. I just go through this very quickly. I read that for a reason, even though I can't speak Hebrew. Aisha ya kamena, va'isha ya pur'ana. That's how that's pronounced. In ancient Persian and Aramaic, pur means lots. In Hebrew, the root word for annul is pur. And that's why they call it Purim. It's a double entendre, just like Aisha is a double entendre. So next week, we'll answer this last question. Why does the book seem to celebrate Mordecai's rise to power? Read chapter 10, ask yourself these questions. Why doesn't the book say in Mordecai 10:3, the last verse of the chapter, he had the favor of all his kinsmen? Instead, it reads, he had the favor of many of his kinsmen. He just saved them all. Why aren't they all happy? And next week, which is our last class before a summary, we will talk about the repayment. It says 10-year-old, but I'm off by a couple of zeros. It's a 1,000-year-old debt that we're going to talk about that gets repaid. There's a 1,200-year-old debt that still hasn't been repaid, that has been repaid now through the book of Esther, and we'll talk about that. Yippee! That's Purim. Thanks for your attention. And we have a guest who has an announcement. Laura Jane?
Hi.
Universal